So, welcome to the channel. This is how we do things. Today I want to make a video about the term Christian nationalism. Only obliquely the movement itself, but really the term. Because the names of things can influence their telos, be their telos even. Now, to establish my bona fides, is it best and desirable and biblical that a people be Christian? Yes. Ought the laws of the land to be Christian or biblical? Yes. Should rulers be Christian? Yes. Would it be lawful and good and right and just to make being a ruler of such a people, such a nation, a Christian? Would it be lawful and just to require that person be a Christian? Yes. And all of these things are not just a, would it be okay, from my perspective. This is what is desirable, what we are working toward, and absolutely part and parcel of the gospel. Every knee shall bow and every tongue shall confess. The nations shall stream in. Jesus is the King of kings. So what then could my problem with the term Christian nationalism possibly be? And no, it's not going to be the association of the word nationalism with the extreme right or with the narrative of Nazi Germany. Well, I said Nazi Germany. That's a false association anyway. Leftist nationalism is quite something. No, instead, it is this: that it is impossible to divorce the concept of nationalism from the modern nation state. And the modern nation state, I think, is an evil. It is unnatural. The modern nation state is by nature an empire. Nations used to be common language, common culture, common history. And of course, there's strong overlap between that idea, the nation, and then the nation state. But nations have always been where the people are, where that people is. Nations are empire. Like France is supposed to be France from one border to the other. Germany is supposed to be Germany from one border to the other. But that's false. Now, the longer time goes on, the more true it becomes. One of the characteristics of the nation state is that it homogenizes. It works very hard to homogenize. Because the weakness of the nation state is that it is an empire but won't acknowledge that it's an empire. Now, there will be some who use the term Christian nationalism who will say, well, I mean nation in that older sense of an identifiable people group. Let me illustrate a little bit the slippery slope that is the word nation and then nationalism with a thought experiment about two so-called civil wars. The English Civil War was a civil war. The American Civil War was no such thing. Rather, it was all the other names that people dislike, that the victors dislike. Right, so it was a war between the states. It was a war of northern aggression. Without saying who the good guys and the bad guys were, why was it not a civil war? Well, in the English Civil War, though it had religious nature to it, we had other nations getting involved, right? So like the Scots got involved directly. Nonetheless, it was a civil war because the war was over. What would happen to the English, and it was being fought by the English themselves. And there was no sense in which they were trying to expel non-English or control non-English. Both sides were English and were trying to shape England and the English. Not so in the United States. You had people groups that had already started pretty far apart for sharing a common language. They did not have particularly common roots. Separated by geography, social habit, religion, and economics. And of course, the grievous sin of chattel slavery. The United States were supposed to be a conglomeration of states. After the war between the states, no such thing. The nation state, the empire under another name, had been established. But in the war between the states, it was not, although the narrative tries to backwrite it, to retrofit the whole thing, it was not a war between the same people groups, the same nation. Think about an empire and civil wars in the empire. The civil wars that we talk about when we talk about Rome were Romans, wherever they were fighting. They could have been fighting on the plains of Philippi. They could have been fighting in North Africa. It was Roman generals with Roman legions fighting about power in Rome. It was not considered a civil war when one of the nations ruled by this empire revolted or waged war on the empire itself. A civil war is when the same people fight. I think this leads to all sorts of interesting questions about the American people. But I know Christian nationalists. I know nationalists who aren't Christians as well, including a fascist homosexual who smokes a pipe. That's how I know him. So I know many Christians who are Christian nationalists. I may be repeating something here, forgive me, but... And so, we ask ourselves, well, what is the United States? And is it a people? And I would say that even if the answer were yes, we would then have to ask, well, what do we want? Do we want an actual government that comes from the people, that is Christian? Or do we want a state that is run by Christians? Obviously, that's better than having the state run by heathens. But we shouldn't be about the machinery anyway. If we are Christian nationalists, it must be in the sense of nations as true, real people groups. Not as those who pay taxes to a nation state. So then who are your people? Well, first and foremost, your people are the church. After that, we can start talking food, family, friends, fertility, and all the other things that excite us when we talk about nations. Which makes me wonder why we're insisting on using a word, nationalism, that's so open to misinterpretation when we already have a word that is misunderstood broadly, widely. Christendom. I love the idea of Christendom. Christendom incorporates kings and clans. Well, I hope you all found this video helpful. Peace of Christ be upon you.